You been watching the news?
Forget about it. Donald Trump.
Forget about it. Debt spending.
Forget about it. Joe Biden.
Forget about it. How about that coronavirus?
Forget about it. Our lack of YouTube subscribers.
Forget about it.
Welcome to Deep Focus. I'm Matt.
And I'm Nate.
And tonight we're talking about Mike Newell's Donnie Brasco.
We are on a bit of an Al Pacino bender, I guess. I don't know
that's
quite
right.
why. This is well, the mob genre is a big genre. It's been around since all the way back to the 1920s, and you've had it in many various iterations. Certain figures or actors, directors have been well associated with it. Al Pacino, naturally, is one of those people who has made a career playing this in various types throughout, beginning all the way back to The Godfather, but again, throughout the rest of his career. And I think this is maybe one of his finest hours as an actor. I think you could even argue it's his best performance.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that question. I mean, do you think this is his best performance? I mean, I think it's one that people forget about. Forget about it.
I was going to say.
Forget about it.
Yeah.
But it's one that really sticks in my mind as potentially his best performance.
Make a question, friend. The whole time Sonny Black's in the can. The whole time. He's got a family. He's got a mistress. He's got a mistress for the mistress. I watched out for all of them. Me, I was the only one. Nobody else gave a fuck. 200 Fazos, week in, week out. Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, he's an interesting actor. And I should also say, I think Johnny Depp's pretty fantastic in this movie, too.
Yeah.
But just focusing in on Al Pacino, his career's been, almost, 50 plus years now. I don't know exactly what his first movie was. Was it Panic in Needle Park, I think?
Was that his very first?
I think that might have been.
It was.
Maybe he had some little small bit somewhere else. I think it was kind of what caught everybody's attention anyway. Yeah. And he had in his earlier career, in the early string of roles he had in the 70s, a bit more subdued as an actor. And then maybe his take in Scarface as Tony Montana starts to get more flamboyant. And then he disappeared for a few years in the 80s. And he comes back in 1989 with Sea of Love, which nobody remembers anymore. But his acting took on a much more, over-the-top kind of personality. He's just a lot more bold in his choices as an actor, I think.
Yeah, he almost became like a parody of himself for a period of time. And
Dunkachino, right?
Yeah.
Dunkachino! You want creamy goodness? I'm your friend. Say hello to my chocolate blend.
Well, yeah, but I think of this movie as kind of his return to more nuanced
It's
acting.
the blending of the two. You get some of that very big, bold, grand gestures that you have in his later career.
Hey, I don't know what your problem is.
Hey, Lefty, come $8,000.
But he layers it with, I think, a lot of nuance and a lot of pathos that makes this, if not his best performance, I think easily then a runner-up, could be said about it. But it really is, I think, an incredible work from him, and it's just a shame that, like you said, it's been forgotten. The movie's been forgotten. I think it's actually, for the mob genre, one of the better instances of that genre, too.
Yeah, it's kind of strange that this movie doesn't seem to be as well regarded as a lot of what we consider to be classic mob movies. But
it was a success when it came out, commercially, critically.
Yeah.
But it came out in 1997, in February of 1997. I remember because I went and saw it in the theater. It's one of the first R-rated movies I got to go see in the theater.
There you go.
And then, of course, that's the big year for Titanic, which just sucked the volume out of everything, sucked the oxygen out of everything. And I think a lot of great movies came out in 97 that just got buried under the complete and total cultural phenomenon of Titanic.
Yeah, LA Confidential being another casualty of that year, unfortunately. My pick for Best Picture of 97, but
Can't argue with that one at all. No. But Al Pacino, I think, definitely should have won the Best Actor award that year.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think of this performance as kind of the analog or, comparable to Clint Eastwood in Unforgiven. It's kind of the self-reflexive Al Pacino mobster performance, right? Or just performance, period.
You want to check in with me tomorrow?
Yeah, all right.
I don't know how the fuck you knew that ring was a Fugazi.
I almost see this as his response to maybe accusations that his prior work glorified the mob life in some way, which is something I never quite understood with a lot of mob films, especially the Godfather films. I mean, to say that that glorifies that lifestyle in any measurable way, I think is really missing the point. Sure, you may have these moments of opulence or living the wealthy life, but those films really don't shy away from the dark side of that kind of existence. But here, I think Al Pacino is interested in this role because of the really bipolar nature of this character. I mean, he's a tough guy, he's a wise guy, he's intimidating.
He's a made man. I mean, he's high up, and he's also completely without any power or any influence. And it's basically like a guy who's been in the military, which they talk about. They make a reference to that. But
Yeah, he actually says it's nothing like it.
What do you know?
It's like, it's kind of like the Army, like a chain of command. So
The Army. Ain't nothing like the Army. The Army is some guy you don't know sends you out to whack some other guy you don't know. Army.
it gets at that point, like you rise in the ranks, and then you just kind of, that's it. There's no more promotions for you. You will just have to live out your existence here.
Yeah, but he's very, very, very fragile, so it's this interesting combination of the tough guy, but also being very vulnerable and very fragile throughout the film. And that's really exemplified by his relationship with Donnie Brasco and the amount of strength he gets from that friendship, right?
Well, this is because we said, I mean, the mob movie has been around since really the dawn of cinema, going back to James Cagney and Edward G. Robinson.
If you ain't out of town by tomorrow morning, you won't never leave it except in a pine box.
Some of those big stars from the 20s, 30s, 40s that were making great mobster movies back then. I guess they're more gangster than they were, technically speaking, mob movies. But I think you could easily have said, and this film was actually being put into production around the time that Goodfellas came out. That was such a huge success that almost everybody said, well, let's just stay away from this thing, because who could top Goodfellas right now? It was such a darling, and it is a great film. I'm glad that they did come out and visit this movie, and they didn't just completely abandon it, because I do think it brings something to the genre that you never would find in a lot of other, which is to say that it's kind of a love story. And I remember when it was being promoted, that was a lot of the angles that some of the critics took with it. And I remember Anne Hesh even being in on David Letterman trying to promote the film and talked about it as a love story, which might not be your best way to get a bunch of young guys to go see a mob movie. But I think it does kind of get at it, right? These two characters of Lefty and Donnie Brasco do form a friendship, and that friendship really is ultimately based on a kind of love, right? And it's a very mature love. It's not something silly and erotic. It's getting at this deeper sense of like the love of brothers, the love of humanity.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it offers, is this sense of the way the mob kind of jeopardizes how you can be a friend to a person, right? I mean, it just brings a certain understanding of the mafia life that you don't really find in a lot of the other movies.
We talked about Tombstone recently and how that movie is about male friendships in a lot of ways, and this kind of is related to that in that sense.
The 90s had this thing, and Pacino had a string of these movies where it was kind of these two leads, in a movie. So Tombstone is take Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer. This you have Al Pacino and Donnie as Lefty, and you have Johnny Depp as Donnie Brasco. They're both lead roles, right? And I think that these movies were very fascinating in what is a male relationship about.
Yeah. Well, the film opens with really one of my favorite credit sequences of all time. And, you know, most TV shows nowadays have these very stylized credit sequences, and I always reminds me of Donnie Brasco's opening, and it's really this great assembly of black and white images, and but also, of course, motion clips as well.
The score from Patrick Doyle is
Beautiful,
very,
beautiful opening theme, right? And the score does get a little bit sappy at times in the film, and makes this feel very much like a movie, and that's one criticism I have against it, but that opening theme is beautiful, and I love that credit sequence. But we start out with a very, very strong scene where we're introduced to Lefty, and then his...
Bruno Kirby as Nicky.
Yeah.
Lincoln is better than a Cadillac. It's a better automobile.
Forget about it. Cadillac got more acceleration. It's got more power. It's got better handling. It's got what? It's got more legroom for your legs. It's got more power.
You just said that.
Bingo.
What I say?
You just said that. More power.
Start to repeat yourself.
I said that.
You're getting senile.
Yeah.
I liked it because I think that right away gives you the sense of the movie is really going to be about just the minutia, the very mundane life of being a mobster. And
Yeah.
just guys sitting around a bar,
Yeah.
kind of trying to pass the day.
And then Lefty takes notice of Donnie at the bar, you know, asking who he is, and subsequently we see him trying to sell a diamond ring to Donnie Brasco. There's so much subtext, even just in that initial scene, right? Like, I always got the sense that the bartender also knew that Donnie was probably a cop. Maybe that's not the case.
I don't know if I ever took that, but I think what you're getting at is the performances and the dialogue capture, I think, how every word really counts a lot.
Exactly.
You want to go embarrass yourself with this thing?
Embarrass myself. Hey, my family, my children, my mother can hold her head up in any neighborhood in this city where she walks down the block. See, in all the 5 boroughs, I'm known. Forget about it.
And
In that world.
right,
yeah,
you
every
can get yourself
turn
into a place where you could get killed because you said the wrong thing.
very specific. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And then Donnie basically proved himself to Lefty by becoming his enforcer in that following scene in the nightclub, where he's confronting the other guy about
The Fugazi.
the Fugazi. That's right. Yeah.
What is Fugazi?
Come on, you know.
Don't you tell me what I know.
You know what you did, pal.
And
That became a little bit of a thing, that word, after this movie. I think it's kind of all but been forgotten now, but there was a little run there where people were talking about things being a fugazi.
Yeah.
And it was obviously from this movie that came about. Yeah, well, I think the film is very much good at how it introduces characters. And part of that's because you take the undercover FBI agent and you throw him into this world so he can very quickly become the person that we relate to, and then he has things explained to him, which realistically, okay, he's been undercover for 2 years. He's not going to need vocabulary to be explained to him. But it works in the narrative of the story, hearing about a friend of mine, a friend of ours.
Okay, when I introduce you, I'm gonna say, this is a friend of mine. That means you're a connected guy. Now, if I said instead, this is a friend of ours, that would mean you were a made guy. A capiche?
Right? And you understand a little bit more about the world these guys are in. But I love how, when you get introduced to that world through Lefty, how everything really seems so utterly pathetic. I think that's the best word to describe it.
Yeah.
They dress pathetic. They have like this false kind of glamour to them, but they're sitting outside, waiting in the cold for the boss to show up. The boss isn't even all that particularly impressive, you know, when Sonny Red shows up. Right?
He's just the guy that happens to have had the biggest club at that moment, right? And
Right.
And
Exactly.
got into power, and he knows that it's probably going to be short-lived.
And that's kind of what the whole film's about, right? Every moment, anybody could turn on anybody, right? And that's what you see, I think, what's really great in Johnny Depp's performance is that he really does show us how you get sucked into that world.
Come on, lift your glass. I die with you, Donnie. Anything happens, I'm responsible.
And I mean, he's even sucked into it himself, right? But at the same time, recognizing that being a part of that world puts everything in jeopardy, you know, not just his own personal life, which I think is also one of the parts of this film that I really like, is how it shows his relationship with his family, with his wife Maggie, with his daughters being destroyed because of the work he's doing. But at the same time, also seeing how the friends he's getting here now are also now in jeopardy. So it's like he becomes a man without a country during the course of this movie, and his whole identity becomes up for grabs a little bit.
Well, and it gets to that conundrum that I think a lot of people that have been undercover have faced is you go through kind of an identity crisis, right? You don't really know who you are anymore because to be effective in that environment, you really do have to change your persona in a pretty profound way. And yeah, the relationship with his wife is very central here, and we come back to that at various points throughout the film. And Anne Heche does a great job too. I think her performance is really strong and forgotten, unfortunately.
It's easy for that kind of role to become the poor put upon wife.
Yeah.
But she makes it much more than that.
She has a real
the writing
strength to
makes it
her.
a lot more than that. And you get the sense of the fact that this woman has her own strength that she's putting upon. She's not just this hapless victim waiting for her man to come home. She really loves her husband, wants her husband back, understands that he's very much committed to this work and wants to support him in the work, so there's a complexity there. And then ultimately realizing she's got to pick up a lot of the failure. That scene with the argument over Christmas is one that I always remember from this movie, because I think it really captures that a dynamic that a lot of couples go through, and obviously a much more dramatic sense here, but just about the different roles you try to play in a marriage and in a family.
Is that what you do with all your time? Conduct polls with all your women?
I'm not even gonna dignify that. Jesus Christ, 7 days a week I'm out there busting my ass, and this is the kind of shit I come home to.
Yeah, anyone that works a job that requires unconventional hours, I think, can relate to that scene in particular, especially if you have kids. So, yeah, I've had similar conversations with my wife from time to time. Nothing, as you said, nothing this dramatic, and there was no domestic violence involved at any point. However, yeah, I think it's very relatable for a lot of people, even if you're not an undercover agent. Yeah. But getting back to his, or Donnie Brasco's relationship with Lefty. So, like you had pointed out earlier, Lefty is, a guy that's put in his time, but has never really moved up the ranks the way he wants to, right? And he's desperate to really prove himself.
He's loyal to this, despite the fact that the organization he's in keeps crapping on him.
Yeah, and he's desperate to find that opportunity to elevate his status, but it's not so much his status, I think, that he's really concerned about. I think he wants to prove that, he can contribute something to the mob.
Yeah. 30 years I'm busting my hump. What do I got? Even a dog gets a warm piece of the sidewalk. I ought to show something for what I did. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
In a way that will make his life memorable, or his life worthwhile in his own eyes.
Because you get glimpses of his own family life, right? Because Donnie goes over there, visits him in his apartment, and you see
It's a very funny scene with him cooking during Christmas.
Yep, cooking in Christmas, and you're just talking about all the best cooks are men, right?
Yeah, and a punch of salt. Yeah.
Punch of salt.
Punch?
Punch. Punch of salt.
Punch or pinch?
Punch. Not pinch. What I say? I said pinch.
Nah, you said punch.
Sometimes you don't make no fucking sense, Donnie.
Those little details. There's a lot of great humor in this film, too.
Ain't the question. I lost a screwdriver here.
You lost a what?
The screwdriver fell down.
Oh, come on. You lost a screwdriver in my fucking stereo?
There is, yeah. It's a great script. Paul Tanazio wrote the script, and I think he did a great job with this. He was nominated. He was the one nomination this movie got from the Oscars.
That's
that
right,
year.
yeah.
No, I think that when you just get to see it, Lefty's son is a druggie. He gets it. He talks about how his ex-wife lives in his own building, and he runs into her in the apartment. You're just like, you feel like this guy has absolutely got nothing to look to for his family. So the mob is what he can find as being what he needs. That's his identity, and yet he also is very unhappy with it and dreams about leaving. If I could get my boat, I would leave.
He's very cynical about it, even though he's, as you said, extremely loyal to it.
Right, because like whenever Donnie will kind of say something, he's like, nope, you can't say that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, he's loyal, even though he's got no real reason to be.
And he has this weird sort of dynamic with Donnie, especially early on, where, I mean, Lefty's constantly lying to himself and to Donnie.
What do you think? You think I got a wire on my car? Huh? What do you think? You think I'm a fucking stupid?
Did I say that? Did I say you got a wire?
And it may change during the course of a given conversation, even.
I always love about the money, right?
Oh, man, don't know me. Look at this. Very generous of you, Don. Thank you. Good boy.
Yeah. I think of the scene where he thinks he's going to be whacked, right? And they take him and give him this lion. And then that pretty funny scene where they're outside the burger joint feeding this lion hamburgers. And
How many words does it take?
Yeah. Well, beforehand, Lefty's convinced he's going to be whacked. And then afterwards, he's telling Donnie, like, you're crazy. I was never going to be whacked. Why would you think that? And
Hey, Donnie, did I say I was going to get whacked?
Not in so many words.
I don't understand you, Donnie. How many words does it take?
Donnie's like, oh, yeah, I misunderstood. So there's this funny give and take between the two of them. And Donnie is, at first, playing into it because he just wants to gain his trust. But after a while, when that friendship becomes more real, he cares about him and he wants him to feel good about himself,
right,
in a meaningful way. And
the whole point that you just hit there, that Donnie initially is really clearly just undercover, and I think Johnny Depp's performance really hits that idea, because that he goes and talks to his handler. Mm-hmm. And I do like how this movie deals with the bureaucracy of both the mob and the FBI, and like their politicking, jockeying, and hey, can you come and help this other guy who's not really doing so well down in Florida? And you're like, well, I don't really care if it puts you at risk, So I just love how it kind of deals with that. But that first scene where he's talking to his handler, he's just like, I got my hook in. He's like, I got him, right?
Yeah.
He's feeling good about it. Doesn't really even care about, he's just a mark, right? And then you will see him progress, and that's the strength of Johnny Depp's performance, that he's able to actually walk you through him developing an emotional bond and a care for the man that he's theoretically going to bring down. One thing I think it would be good to talk about is just Mike Newell's direction. Mm-hmm. This is really a one-off for him in his filmography. He came off of, prior to this, I think his last movie was 4 Weddings and a Funeral, which was a pretty big hit. Yeah. But nothing before this would ever indicate to you that he'd be the man you hired to do a mob movie, and nothing he did after it really would indicate that either. He had replaced Stephen Frears, who was going to direct this back when they initially were planning to make it in the early 90s. I think it's a great choice. His direction on this, I think, brings certain sensibilities that you wouldn't find, partly maybe because he's English, and thus has just an outsider's look at the mob and at American culture. But I think his direction does give you some of the sense of the intoxicating nature of the mob. You get those montages of them doing crimes, stealing things, set to the song Happiness, very appropriately. And then it just kind of turns on a dime and gets very grim when they kill a person, right? When Sonny Black, played chillingly by Michael Madsen, kills a person. That's a smart move of how to kind of take some of those tropes of the genre and then turn them around a little bit. And whenever violence comes in, it is pretty depressing.
It's pretty horrifying, too. I mean, I think of the scene where they're assassinating Sonny Red in that basement. I mean, that's like one of the more horrifying murder scenes I can think of in a movie.
It's clumsy, it's awkward.
It's messy. They're screaming, and it feels very realistic in that this is probably what it would be like.
And then having to cut them up and get rid of the bodies.
Yeah.
You see that aftermath element, and
yeah, it's a brutal scene, but it needs to be that way, and it's very, very effective.
It's also part of it works also for the characters, because you're seeing how it's impacting Donnie, right? I mean, there's also the scene where they're in the Japanese restaurant, and we know he's got the mic in the wire in his boot. so he can't take them off or he'll be exposed. And so you have that sense of he can't let this happen.
Yeah.
And then it goes out of his control, and they start beating this poor Japanese man because they're trying to defend their friend.
Yeah.
And he gets drawn into it and actually starts beating him up too. And you just see how this role is changing him, right? And then eventually, of course, this culminates in his domestic life, where he eventually will strike his own wife, right?
Yeah. I want to mention, you mentioned his relationship with the FBI and the police. I love that little scene with the surveillance guys, played by Paul Giamatti.
Tim Blake Nelson.
Blake Nelson, yeah, these little bit parts.
Before they were known to anybody.
Yeah, the forget about it scene, right? Just the interaction between them. It's a great little one-off moment that's very memorable.
Hey, Bully, you got a 1-inch pecker, and Bully says, forget about it.
Forget about it. Paulie, forget about it.
Yeah, that's one of the great things this film is able to do. It is able to balance mixtures of emotions, right? You have these moments where there's some levity. You have moments where there's a lot of stakes. You know, I think of the scenes between Donnie and Lefty as the film's progressing into its final act.
Yeah.
Particularly as Lefty figures out that the boat that they used when they were down in Florida and they're trying to entertain the mob boss down there was the federal boat that Donnie had gotten. Just you realize the seriousness of what's at stake, right? And yet at the same time, it's not just the sense of like, oh, suspense for the sake of a movie. It's a personal stake, right? Lefty might kill his friend, or Donnie might have to get out, and that exposes Lefty, and in a sense, he kills his friend, right? And so there's just no seemingly good scenario as the film moves towards its climax, which, you know, we obviously, it's over 20 years old. I suppose we can maybe spoil that eventually Donnie does come out, right? And he gets pulled out. He doesn't really come out. He's just the FBI raids and takes him out.
Yeah, before he has to kill somebody, basically.
Right,
yeah.
or before he gets killed,
Yeah.
right? But I think that leads to one of which, you know, if you're asking me, like, maybe this isn't Al Pacino's best performance. I think you could argue it is, but if it isn't, I think it does have his best scene as an actor, which is that scene when he gets the call to go to his own death.
Yeah.
And he knows exactly what it is this time. You can see he's been waiting. He's in his suit, and just the way he gives his line deliveries to his wife, the way he holds his posture, that kind of just gets everything fixed, tries to leave whatever little bit he can for her.
If Donnie calls, tell him if there's gonna be anyone, I'm glad it was him.
It's such a heartbreaking scene.
It is, and especially, you don't really get the sense of the gravity of it, I think, until that part where he starts taking off his jewelry and puts his billfold in that drawer and then keeps the drawer open. That little detail always really sticks with me. He knows deep down what he's done and who Donnie is. And by the end of the film, that last scene you mentioned, he definitely knows, right? But at the same time, the friendship is still very, very meaningful to him. And he realizes that, you know, Donnie Brasco may have been an undercover agent, but he was trying to help him at various points. He knows he cared about him, and still does care for him. And even though they're technically enemies, that friendship is still very, very strong.
Well, that line he has, if it was going to be anyone, tell him I was glad it was him.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, it's such a devastating line, but it's also a line. It's the closest I think he can ever come in to say that he loved somebody.
Yeah.
You gotta believe me.